The hanging tree stood just outside Dry Creek, its branches bare and twisted like fingers clawing at the sky. Everyone in town knew it. Some pretended not to see it when they rode past. Others slowed their horses, eyes flicking upward, as if the past might still be swaying there in the wind. Samantha Hale stood beneath it now. The dust was still, the air heavy with heat and memory. 1 year had passed since they hanged her husband from that very branch. Yet the scene lived sharp and cruel in her mind. The snap of the rope, the way the crowd murmured like cattle, the sheriff's voice, flat and final, reading a sentence Samantha knew was wrong. Ethan Hale had been no thief, no murderer. He'd been a quiet man, strong-backed and soft-spoken, more comfortable fixing fences than defending himself with words. And that, Samantha knew now, was what had killed him. She touched the scar at her wrist where the rope burn had caught her when she'd tried to reach him. The town had pulled her back, some out of duty, others out of fear, and one man out of necessity. George Callahan. He had been the one to cut Ethan down once the crowd dispersed. The hangman by title, though Dry Creek never called him that aloud. George did the jobs no one else wanted, burying the dead, cleaning blood from the jail floor, cutting ropes that should never have been tied. Samantha had not spoken his name since that day, until now. Behind her, boots crunched on gravel. "You shouldn't be here," a man said quietly. She did not turn. "Neither should you." George stopped a few feet away. Samantha could feel him there, tall and solid, his presence heavy with unspoken things. He looked older than she remembered, more lines at the eyes, more weight in his shoulders. Guilt, perhaps, or just time. "I heard you asked about the hanging," he said. Samantha finally faced him. Her eyes were sharp, the kind that had learned how to survive without kindness. "I heard you were the only man left in this town who might still remember the truth." George's jaw tightened. "I remember plenty. Doesn't mean it's safe to talk about." "My husband died because no one talked," she snapped. "So forgive me if I don't much care about safe." The wind stirred the leaves above them. George glanced up at the branch, then back at her. "Ethan Hale didn't kill that rancher," he said slowly. "I knew it then. I know it now." Her breath caught. A year of silence shattered in one sentence. "Then why did you let them hang him?" "I didn't have proof," George said. "Only doubts. And doubts don't stop a rope. Once a town's decided it wants blood." Samantha laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you cut him down and went on with your life?" "No," George said, his voice low. "I cut him down, and it followed me every day since." She studied his face, searching for a lie. She found none, only something broken and stubborn beneath the surface. "I'm leaving Dry Creek," she said suddenly. "But not before I find who set him up. Someone planted that stolen money in our barn. Someone whispered lies until they became truth." George hesitated. "You can't do this alone." "I already have," she replied. He met her gaze. "Then let me help you finish it." Samantha looked once more at the hanging tree, then back at the man who had cut her husband free, too late. "Fine," she said. "But understand this, George Callahan, if you're lying to me, I'll see you swinging from this tree next." George nodded once. "Fair enough." Together, they turned away from the tree, unaware that Dry Creek was already watching and that the truth they sought would cost more blood before it set anyone free. Dry Creek woke early, as if the town itself feared being caught unprepared. By the time the sun crested the low hills, Samantha and George were already riding down Main Street, dust curling around their horses' legs. People watched from porches and shop windows. Some recognized Samantha immediately, the widow with the iron spine. Others noticed George beside her and frowned. The pairing unsettled them. Widows were meant to grieve quietly. Men like George were meant to stay invisible. "Everyone's staring," Samantha said without looking at him. "They always do," George replied. "They just don't always admit why." They stopped in front of the old sheriff's office. The building sagged like a tired old man, its paint peeling its door scarred by years of boots and bad decisions. The sheriff who had ordered Ethan's hanging was long gone, rode out 2 months later, claiming sickness, but his records remained. George dismounted first. If there's anything written down about the case, it'll be in there. Though I warn you, papers in this town have a way of missing pages. Samantha swung down, her jaw set. Then we read what's left. Inside, the air smelled of dust and stale ink. Sunlight cut through the grime on the windows, illuminating shelves stacked with ledgers. George moved with familiarity, pulling one down and flipping through it. Rancher's name was Thomas Wilkes, he said. Shot dead on his land. Money missing. No witnesses. Samantha folded her arms, except the ones who swore Ethan was seen near the ranch. George snorted. Every man in town had been near that ranch at some point. He stopped at a page and frowned. This here time of death, listed as just before sundown. Samantha leaned closer. Ethan was home with me then. We were fixing the stove. Mrs. Calder across the creek saw him too. Her statement isn't here, George said. Because they never wrote it down, Samantha replied bitterly. They didn't want it written. A sound outside made George stiffen. Voices, male, curious, then sharp. Company, he muttered. The door swung open. Deputy Frank Miller stepped inside, hat low over his eyes. He was younger than George, but ambition hardened his face. Well, I'll be damned, Frank said. If it isn't the widow and the rope cutter. Samantha met his stare. What do you want, deputy? Frank smiled thinly. Sheriff's gone, but law's still law. And digging up old cases tends to stir trouble. Truth usually does, George said. Frank's eyes flicked to the ledger. You won't find what you're looking for. That's so, Samantha asked. Then why are you nervous? Frank stepped closer. Because Dry Creek's finally quiet again. Folks don't want to relive ugly things. My husband's death isn't a story, Samantha said, her voice steady but cold. It's a crime. Frank leaned in, lowering his voice. Careful, Mrs. Hale. Accusing the town won't bring him back. No, she said. But it might keep the next innocent man from swinging. For a moment, it looked like Frank might reach for his gun. George shifted subtly, placing himself half a step closer to Samantha. Frank exhaled sharply and backed away. You've got until sundown. Then I expect you both gone from this office. When he left, the room felt smaller. That was a warning, George said. I know, Samantha replied, which means we're close. George flipped another page. There's a name here, not Wilkes. Someone who found the money in your barn. Samantha's heart thudded. Who? George hesitated. Caleb Rourke. Her hands clenched. Caleb Rourke had been Wilkes' business partner, a respected man, a generous man. The kind towns trusted, without question. The wrong man died, Samantha said quietly. And the right one still walks free, George answered. Outside, the church bell tolled noon. Samantha closed the ledger. Then, we don't waste another minute, she said. We go where the lies started. George nodded, already knowing this path led straight into danger. And this time, Dry Creek would not be able to pretend it wasn't watching. Caleb Rourke's ranch sat 3 miles west of Dry Creek, where the land flattened into open grass and the sky seemed too wide for secrets. His house was large, freshly painted, a symbol of prosperity built on clean lines and clean lies. Samantha slowed her horse as they approached. Men like Rourke, she said. They don't get their hands dirty. No, George agreed. They pay others to do it. They dismounted near the fence. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. No ranch hands in sight. No cattle moving in the pasture. George scanned the yard. Something's off. Before Samantha could answer, a gunshot cracked the air. George shoved her down as the bullet struck the fence post inches from where her head had been. They hit the dirt hard, hearts pounding. Inside the house, George hissed. Upper window, another shot rang out, closer this time. Samantha rolled, pulling the small revolver she kept hidden beneath her coat. I'm done running, she said. George studied her for half a second, then nodded. On my mark. They moved fast, using the porch posts for cover before bursting through the front door. The house smelled of oil and metal. Papers lay scattered across a desk, as if someone had left in a hurry. A man bolted for the back door. "Stop!" George shouted. The man turned, gun raised. Samantha fired first. The bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him into the wall. He collapsed with a grunt, dropping the weapon. Blood soaked into his shirt as George kicked the gun away. "Don't kill me," the man gasped. "I was just paid to scare you off." "By who?" Samantha demanded, pressing the barrel to his chest. "Rourke," he groaned. "He knew you were coming. Said if you started asking questions, things would get complicated." George exchanged a look with Samantha. "Where is he?" The man swallowed. "Left town last night, headed north." Samantha lowered the gun slightly. "Why?" "Because Wilkes wasn't the first," the man said weakly. "And he won't be the last if the truth comes out." George searched the desk, gathering papers. His eyes widened. These ledgers, Wilkes and Rourke, were skimming money from land deals. Ethan found out. Samantha's chest tightened. "That's why they framed him." George nodded. "Ethan must have threatened to expose them." A noise outside made them both turn. Horses, multiple. George swore under his breath. "Deputy Miller." The back door burst open. Frank Miller stood there with 2 armed men. "Well now," Frank said. "Looks like you've been busy." Samantha straightened. "You knew." Frank smiled without warmth. "I suspected, but Rourke pays better than justice." George stepped forward. "You hang the wrong man and protect the right one. That's the kind of law you stand for." Frank's eyes hardened. "I stand for order." He gestured with his gun. "Hand over the papers." Samantha laughed softly. "Or what?" For a moment, Frank hesitated. Then George moved. He lunged, knocking Frank's gun aside as Samantha fired again. Chaos erupted, shouts, gunfire, splintering wood. When the dust settled, one of Frank's men lay unconscious. The other fled. Frank himself lay on the floor, wounded and shaking. George pressed his boot against Frank's chest. "This ends now." Frank coughed. "You think this town will believe you?" Samantha held up the blood-stained ledger. "They don't have to believe me. They'll see the truth in black and white." She looked down at Frank, her voice calm and deadly. "And if they don't, I'll make them." As they rode out with the ledgers, Samantha felt something shift inside. Her not peace, not yet, but purpose. Ethan's name would not end on a rope. Not if she and George had anything to say about it. They rode hard, back to Dry Creek, the sun sinking low behind them, turning the land red and gold. The ledgers were wrapped tight in Samantha's saddlebag, heavier than their weight, in paper heavy with truth, with names, with blood. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, George broke the silence. "Once we show this, there's no going back. Rourke, Miller, anyone tied to this will come after us." Samantha kept her eyes forward. They already did. Dry Creek appeared ahead, its buildings clustered like uneasy witnesses. Word traveled fast in small towns, and by the time they reached Main Street, people were already gathering. Whispers followed them like dust. George dismounted in front of the saloon. "This is as public as it gets." Samantha nodded. "Good." They pushed through the doors. The room fell silent. Glasses froze mid-air. Conversations died. Every eye turned to the widow and the man who cut her husband down. Samantha stepped onto a chair. "My husband, Ethan Hale, was hanged from the tree outside this town," she said, her voice carrying. "You were told he was a thief and a murderer. You were lied to." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. George laid the ledgers on the table and opened them. "These books belong to Thomas Wilkes and Caleb Rourke. They detail stolen land, stolen money, and the name of the man who discovered Ethan Hale." Someone shouted, "That could be forged." Samantha met the man's gaze. "Then explain why Wilkes was killed the day after Ethan confronted him. Or why Rourke fled town last night." The room buzzed, faces paled. Others hardened with anger at themselves, at the law, at the lie they had accepted. Mrs. Calder stepped forward, her hands shaking. Ethan was with Samantha the night Wilkes died. I told the sheriff. He wouldn't listen. More voices joined in. I saw him in town. He never left his land. The truth, once loosened, poured out. The saloon doors opened again. Deputy Miller stumbled in, bandaged and furious, gun in hand. Enough, he shouted. This is a farce. George turned calmly. You're under arrest, Frank, for conspiracy, corruption, and the murder of an innocent man. Laughter broke out sharp and disbelieving. You, Frank sneered. By whose authority? George reached into his coat and produced a worn badge. By the authority of a man who's tired of cutting down bodies. Silence fell. Frank raised his gun. The crowd surged before he could fire. Hands grabbed him, dragged him down. The town that had once stood silent beneath a hanging tree now roared. Samantha watched, her heart pounding not with fear, but with something close to release. Later, as night settled and torches burned in the street, George stood beside her, under the hanging tree once more. It won't bring him back, George said quietly. No, Samantha replied, but it brings his name home. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small knife. Without ceremony, she cut a shallow mark into the tree's bark. For Ethan, she said. George touched the scarred trunk. For all of them. As they walked back to Wardtown, Samantha felt the weight on her chest ease, not gone, but lighter. Tomorrow would bring trials, consequences, change. But tonight, the truth stood taller than the tree that once stole her husband's life. And for the first time in a year, Samantha allowed herself to breathe. Dawn broke slow over Dry Creek, the kind of morning that felt unsure of itself. The town had not slept. Lanterns still glowed in windows, and men stood in quiet knots along Main Street, speaking in low voices, as if afraid the truth might shatter if spoken too loudly. Samantha stood at the edge of town, the hanging tree behind her. The rope was gone now. Someone had cut it down in the night and burned it. The ashes scattered to the wind. It didn't erase what had happened, but it felt like a beginning. George approached, hat in his hands. Rourke was caught just past the northern ridge. He said, tried to run. He won't get far this time. She nodded, unsurprised, and Miller locked up. Town council's sending for a circuit judge. Samantha let out a long breath she felt she'd been holding for a year. Ethan would have liked that, she said softly. A fair judge. Real law. George studied her face. What will you do now? She turned, looking toward the hills beyond Dry Creek. I don't know. Maybe I stay. Maybe I leave. But wherever I go, I won't be running anymore. They walked together, toward the tree. Samantha placed her hand against the rough bark, closing her eyes. For a moment, she could almost feel Ethan's presence, not as pain, but as warmth. I couldn't save him, she said, but I saved his name. George swallowed. I should have done more. She looked at him then, really looked. You're doing it now. The wind stirred the branches overhead, gentle this time. No creaking rope, no murmuring crowd, just silence and open sky. George cleared his throat. If you decide to stay, Dry Creek could use someone like you. Samantha smiled faintly. And you? He hesitated, then met her eyes. I think I'd like to stay too. Help rebuild something better. She considered him for a long moment, then nodded. We'll see. They turned back toward town as the sun climbed higher, washing Dry Creek in clean light. The past would never disappear, but it no longer ruled them. Behind them, the hanging tree stood bare and harmless, at last no longer a symbol of injustice, but a reminder that truth, once cut free, could change everything. And so, the widow of the hanging tree walked forward, not alone, not afraid, and no longer silent. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.